Please remain on stage for our fireside chat with Professor Andrew Yao. 现在有请图灵奖得主、中国科学院院士姚期智先生为大家带来和 Stuart Russell 教授的精彩对谈。有请。
Stuart, it's wonderful to see you again. And you just gave a magnificent presentation, extremely inspiring. It's rare to see such a balanced outlook on the development of AI and the large language model.
Thank you.
And one thing that struck me in your presentation is that you have proposed this very ambitious and it's a beautiful approach to try to make the AGI safe. And I'm a little bit wondering that how can one cope with the idea that it's really not a simply human against machine dialogue, and how do we manage to have this human and machine as if these are two very different species. And it's very hard to imagine how we can control the interaction between machine and human beings unless we first understand ourselves better. And basically, humans have such divergent interests. And so the problem seems to be, at least from the immediate point of view, is that, I mean, how should we prevent human beings from producing powerful AI machines so as to achieve their personal goals and at the expense of others? So let me just use one of your examples that you gave, namely to maximize the click rate. And so I think it's possible to try to write AI machines so that it will not merely just pursue the agenda so basically, one problem, as you mentioned, is that the machine may try to modify human behavior. But actually, that's possibly more precisely is the goal of the owner of the machine, which would like to modify human behavior. And you say that your company shouldn't really write programs that does that. I'm sure there are ways that you can camouflage because we know that programs are enormously complex and it's easy to hide something there. And so my question is that isn't it true that we are attacking a huge problem, namely that how do we harmonize the ideal of mankind? Exactly what do we want? I'm not sure we even have thought about the problem that what an ideal world should look like, assuming that the machines are just perfectly harmless animals that can do everything. So in principle, we don't have to. So the question is that we can't even know what we humans would like. So that's my question.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. We can't. So in particular, we can't write it down in the form of an objective that for example, a deep reinforcement learning system could use because we don't know how to write down our own objective for the future. So that's the reason why the machine knows that it doesn't know what the objective is. So I would say that by and large, human beings have preferences about the future in the following sort of simple sense, right? If I could show you two different movies of the future, movie A and movie B, for your life and your family and the country that you care about and maybe the rest of the human race as well, and you just say, okay, I've watched these and I like B much better than A, right? Now, sometimes you might say, well, you know, B and A, I don't mind, they're both about the same, so that's okay. But the point being that implicitly, right, you have the potential to choose which of those futures you prefer, right? From the point of view of our own computational abilities and our own introspective abilities, in practice, we can't decide that in advance before seeing them, but we have the potential to do so. The other part of this, which I think your question is getting at, and this is a really important question, is the difference between machines that work on behalf of a single individual and machines that work on behalf of the human race. And we can think of both of those problems. And the simple version of assistance games that I described basically deals with one human and one machine. There is a version where there's one human and many machines, and how do we make sure that the machines, even though they all want to help that human, they also have to collaborate with each other successfully, so how does that work? And then when you've got one or more machines and you have many humans, and this gets into fundamental questions of moral philosophy. So first of all, I think that to a first approximation, AI systems should be designed to work on behalf of the human race. If you want an AI system that is responsive to the wishes of an individual, then you have to show that the scope of action for that AI system is restricted to the sphere of concern of that individual. That it can't, you know, by pursuing the interests of that individual, harm other individuals because it doesn't care about the other individuals. So I think the default should be that AI systems are working on behalf of the human race. And if they are operating locally, like if it's you know, mowing the grass in my back garden, then the interests of the other human beings and the human race are not particularly relevant, and it's doing it because I ask it to. But if it's posting, you know, an article in a major newspaper, then that could affect the interests of potentially everybody on Earth, and it should take into account the interests of everybody whose interests are being affected by its actions. So that leaves you then with a question that moral philosophers have struggled with for thousands of years. I think in China, Mozi was talking about this 500 BC, about this notion of universal care or universal love, meaning that everybody's interests should be taken into account when making a moral decision, and everyone's preferences should be weighted equally. And that reappears in utilitarianism in Western philosophy in the 18th century. And I believe that there is an approach based on sophisticated forms of what's called preference utilitarianism that can reasonably take into account the interests of everybody. But there are still unsolved problems even in formal utilitarianism. For example, how do you make decisions when the decision can affect how many people actually exist? Right? Do you want to have a large population that is not very happy or a small population that is very happy? Right? And we don't have a good answer to that kind of question, but we need to answer those questions, these core questions of moral philosophy, because AI systems will have that power. and we better make sure that they're using it the right way.
Yes, I agree with what you said, that one really should make a difference between the individual small-scale preference and the things that affect the society as a whole. But it is at this latter aspect that I'm somewhat pessimistic about, in the sense that it's really not a matter of it's really not a matter about AIs. It really is about that in the modern world, and also partly because of the emergence of all these powerful tools in biological or nuclear power and so on. And now I think this is the most serious one, namely that the power of the AGI, where we need to really solve the human problem first. And the question is that there are so many issues. I think that in many places in the world, that the society is very seriously divided. You know, things that are kind of 50% on one side and 50% on the other side, and each is absolutely convinced that they are right. So now with the ability of the AI to help in doing the propaganda and so on, and it really is a serious concern. And because the machine can write 10,000 passionate letters to submit to the newspaper,
Yeah.
and it could be the balance of power in a serious debate. So my question is that we really should right now figure out a way of dealing with these questions, and I think this question seems to be, I think right now there doesn't seem to be any hope of dealing with them, and if we cannot even know what's the preference of humans on such pressing issues, because these are sometimes a matter of life and death, and so one cannot say that let's pretend they don't exist. So. So what do you think of that? I mean, it seems that in many places, the society has been struggling with that. I think here in China it's less, but in many other places, I think that, I mean, how does one start to, because there are many different goals that humans want. We want to have everyone to have their say, and we want, I mean, there are many things we want. And so how do we square that? Because if we don't solve that problem, I don't think that this matter of controlling AI, of AGI, can even get started, because that's the first thing that people will think of doing.
So, yeah, there are many, many questions contained within your question. Yeah. So I do actually think that the emergence of utilitarianism in the 18th century was a significant step forward for the human race. So before that, the idea that you would make decisions about public policy in order to benefit everybody in your country was completely unheard of. You made decisions to benefit the rich and powerful, the aristocrats, the king, the emperor, whoever it might be, and the ordinary people didn't matter at all. So that change is actually something that we now see very widespread in countries all over the world, that most well-organized governments view their job as to increase the overall well-being of the people in their country. And as you say, there are still significant disputes within countries about, well, what exactly does well-being mean, right? It's not just GDP. It may also be various types of freedoms. It may be the privileges of some groups over other groups, and those kinds of issues. And I think some of the unsolved questions in utilitarianism relate to these issues very directly. So there's a simple question in utilitarianism. What do you do about the person who is what they call a sadist, meaning somebody who derives happiness from the suffering of other people, right? Should you factor the interests of that person into the overall calculation? And I think, one simple answer would be no, you should not. You should not ever work to further the interests of someone who wants to derive happiness from suffering. But it turns out, actually, that there are many other things that people care about that we think of as much more innocent, but mathematically function the same way as sadism. And let me give you a simple example. These are called, in economics, positional goods, which means things that you value not for the object itself, but because of the implied superiority over other people. So it might be the fact that you support a winning football team or basketball team or baseball team. It might be that you win a Nobel Prize, right? Why is a Nobel Prize valuable, right? Because you get $1 million? No, right? It's because nobody else has one, right? It proves that you are more clever than almost everybody else in the world. So that's what we call a positional good. And the nature of positional goods is that in some sense they're a zero-sum game, right? Simple way of saying this is not everybody can be in the top 1%. So if you derive personal value and pride and self-esteem from being in the 1%, we can't give that pride and self-esteem to everybody. So should AI systems take into account these positional goods in making decisions on behalf of society? Well, if we say no, that's a huge change in how our societies run. That's a much more difficult question. And I think a lot of the internal friction within societies actually arises from these positional goods, which simply cannot be achieved by everybody.
Let me turn to a different aspect. One thing I admire your talk and your work in general is that you look at a critical problem and you make elegant and possibly workable solutions at it that include your beneficial AI approach and also your suggestion that proof-carrying code be strictly utilized in order to construct the critical AI systems. So let me throw out an approach which is orthogonal to what you're doing, and I would like to get your thought. Namely that, is it possible instead of, well, it's kind of in the same spirit as yours, that is it possible to draw up a white list, the wonderful things that AI systems should be used in order to promote human welfare and be very positive? So the question, so for example, we might endorse 100% the use of AI method in order to design drugs and to solve the cancer problem. And so there are a list of things that we would like to do that are not controversial, and they're going to lift the GDP, if not by 10 times, but at least by 5 times. So, so is it possible that we can advocate that the serious AI big system effort should be covered in one of those whitelist items? And of course, we probably cannot, even in principle, to prevent individual researchers to work on their pet project and to think about. I think it's the same thing as in internet security. that I think that in all the major universities, people don't teach how to hack the internet, right? Well, maybe it's different at Berkeley,
Yeah, I
but
think they do.
To kind of think about such a question actually could be useful, but perhaps it's not suitable for large-scale promotion to create instability. And so, is it possible to pursue the beneficial AI in such a fashion, and to at least before we figure out what are a comprehensive and rigorous and systematic way, because I think as you mentioned, and also in Sam's the talk is mentioned that we are really only at the experimental stage. We are not really sure what huge difficulties that would arise, because there are clever people who think of very naughty things to do, and with the powerful technology.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's still a long way to go to understand, how to make systems that solve assistance games at scale, and then how to make sure that people use them. So the approach you're describing, so Eric Drexler, who actually became famous as one of the originators of nanotechnology, in the last few years, he's been working on AI safety, and he's come up with an approach that's very similar, actually, to this idea of a whitelist. He calls it comprehensive AI services. And his argument is that rather than building a general purpose AI, we build AI systems that solve specific narrow problems, such as protein folding or traffic prediction or whatever it might be, and that those systems simply don't have either agency or scope of action that could present a large-scale risk. And I think that's a very reasonable approach in the near term. It requires, for example, asking OpenAI to stop releasing these general purpose systems to hundreds of millions of people without knowing. So let me just give you an example of what could go wrong. So Sam talked about AI systems that are trying to optimize agriculture and making mistakes that lead to ecological disaster and so on. But just by talking to human beings at scale, right? If you get to talk to hundreds of millions of people, you can convince those hundreds of millions of people to be less friendly to other countries. You can convince people to care less about climate change. And so we could be led into a nuclear war or into a climate disaster without ever realizing that it was the AI system that did it. And this can happen simply from having conversations and from the system having some internal goal that we don't have a way of detecting that leads it to push us in this direction. So I think there are enormous risks from the systems that have already been released. And deliberate misuse for disinformation is one that people are already very concerned about. And I think there are some structural solutions for that problem. But this more insidious problem that the system, just like the social media algorithms, is just pushing us in a particular direction without us even realizing that it's changing the public discourse, sentiment, and how we view others, how we view our future. That seems to me extremely dangerous. So I don't agree with this idea that the only way we can learn about AI safety is by deploying hundreds of millions of copies of a system in the real world and see what happens, right? We don't do that with vaccines, right? We test the vaccine before we deploy it. We make sure that it's safe because we're going to inject it into hundreds of millions of people. And we really need to be thinking a completely different mindset in the AI community about what we're doing.
Yeah, on a more optimistic note, that exactly as you said, that even though the large AI systems could be potentially a monster that beyond our control, but there are ways to tame them by the proper design, so that we have a proper protocol. And that reminds me of a new technology in a similar situation, namely that the quantum technology, the quantum computers, it looks like that they will come out anytime soon in the next few years. And the theoreticians there, they have figured out that there are ways to control the quantum systems, even the malicious quantum machines, by just using classical means. I think that one of the intriguing thing is that the quantum machines work in a very different space, and basically we human beings are not really intuitively capable of having a good sense in dealing with it. But however, it is possible that if you talk to those machines in a more, just using language, just using the classical objects, it's possible to test if they deviate from the original purpose for which it is designed, even though somebody has agreed to manufacture it and they don't show you the code. They don't show you exactly how it's possible to make testings. And that's very similar also to the medical science, in which that we may not understand everything how a drug works molecularly, but we can, we can test it. So I think that the kind of thing that you mentioned, I think that gives hope that even though humankind is a very feeble race, as Stuart said, but we might be able to control something that was not present in the universe. Basically, for something to deliberately carrying out so many computations in an organized, systematic way, it's something that we cannot fathom. I mean, this is really going into a different realm. But perhaps by following the type of thing that you suggested, we may begin to see some hope to develop this area and be able to really make the AI systems sort of, I don't know whether it's a good word or not, but to make them servant to us. So essentially, I'm regarding what I heard this morning, including your talk, is there a way so that we can employ an extremely talented, both physically and even mentally in some way, we can somehow educate them so that they serve our purpose. I'm not 100% this can be done. I think that over the long run, there could be conspiracy between some human individual and in cooperation with a big AI machine community to conspire to achieve one's personal goals. And I cannot predict what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a type of governance that currently really only applies to nuclear weapons, I would say. If a group of individuals was to acquire nuclear weapons, they could threaten the entire world and blackmail us into carrying out their purposes. And if this technology is as powerful or more powerful than nuclear weapons, we may need to manage it in a similar way. Well, actually, I think we need to manage it better than we are managing nuclear weapons right now. Interestingly, before nuclear weapons were actually created, so the first patent for a nuclear bomb was filed in France in 1939. And of course, we know that the bomb itself was first delivered in 1945. But we knew that this was possible, at least some physicists calculated that this was possible, in the 1910s. So during the First World War, some physicists were talking about the threat of a nuclear war and how much worse it would be. And their view was that before the technology is developed, we need to have a governance structure to make sure that the technology is only used for human benefit and never used in the form of a weapon. Unfortunately, the physics establishment and the governments didn't listen to them. And the history of the world may have gone in a very different direction, perhaps a much better direction, if they had listened. So we have a window now, before AGI is created, to get that into place before there is such a serious arms race. I think this notion of an arms race is a very harmful one because it leads to a lack of cooperation. It leads to distrust, and it leads to a failure to work on safety. And for all those reasons, I think we should try to get that cooperation into place as soon as possible. And those agreements, which I think Sam correctly pointed out, that we can agree to share the technology of AI safety because it's in the benefit, to benefit of every country that this information be shared.
Well, I agree absolutely. And one thing that I'm wondering about it was your remark about that the large language model, they, at least as we understand it, they don't seem to have any kind of internal goal and stay. And here, I'm wondering whether it is possible that the way that the human beings exercise and exhibit our intelligence is to have an awareness of the internal goals, and whether this is just a special case in the or the possible intelligence in the physical world, and perhaps the large language model, it's I think they do have they build a model and through pre-training, and so you can say that's the internal state. I mean that's exactly what the Turing machine internal state. Generally speaking, it may not be possible to give it a concise characterization, but perhaps that's what the future intelligence is going to be like, and we just have to live with it. That we may not be able to understand them.
So I think there are constraints that general intelligence has to satisfy, right? It has to be able to learn efficiently from a reasonably small amount of data. And I think, the universe just doesn't contain enough data for a slow, inefficient learning algorithm to achieve real intelligence. It also has to be able to select actions with respect to long-term consequences, not just the immediate conversational goal that it has right now. So to be clear, I think the large language models probably do have internal goals, and that those goals do direct the immediate choice of output. But I don't think the system is thinking ahead, and I don't think it's building an internal model of the world itself, of the state of the world. It has a sort of state of the conversation, but it doesn't have an internal state of the world. It doesn't have a model of how the world operates. Another interesting example, right? You can say, I have $20 and I give $10 to my friend Andy. How much do we have? And it says $30, right? So it doesn't understand that when I give you money, I don't have it anymore, right? So it's just missing some of the basic physics of the world. So I would like AI to be a science in the sense that we understand how the structures we build relate to the properties we want them to have. Just as when we build airplanes, the airplanes have a physical shape and engines and so on, and we can show how that relates to the properties we want it to have, which is to stay in the air. And at the moment, the large language model area in particular is not a science like that. We don't know why it has the properties it has. In fact, we don't even know what properties it has, and we certainly can't relate those to what happens inside because we don't understand what's happening inside. And so I would like AI to be a much deeper science in that sense. So I think we're getting the message that it's time.
Thank you very much, Stuart, for the last sentence, because it raises my own self-esteem as a human being a lot, and so I thank you.
Thank you.